Gonzaga fans got a glimpse of the real Steele Venters working out, a promising sign for his recovery, and then it's on the right track.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Friday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Well, folks, conference realignment is back in the news. It struck on the West Coast again. We're going to discuss Utah Valley's latest move, what it means for the WCC, what it means for Gonzaga as well, plus a transfer with local and Gonzaga ties that just decommitted from another program. We'll talk about him and what that could mean for the Zags in the second segment. But first, we are leading off today's show talking about an Instagram video. It's not typically how we lead off shows of Locked On Zags, but I thought that there was some significance here for those of you who are on Instagram who might have seen this. Steele Venters, the now longtime Gonzaga guard who has yet to actually set foot on the floor in a regulation game because of multiple injuries. Steele Venters posted a video on his Instagram account of him working out at a gym, and it really looked like Steele Venters was moving great in the video. Obviously, it's a curated clip. You know, you're not necessarily getting a medical diagnosis or being able to glean a whole lot from something like that. But I think it is somewhat telling that Venters and you know his camp felt comfortable releasing a video showing him doing the work and showing him put in the effort, and B, obviously, the fact that he is able to do some of the stuff he was able to do in the video. Again, for those of you who've seen it, he's doing a lot of ball handling drills, like dribbling through cones, dribbling with two basketballs. He was doing some drills where he was doing dribbling while also having to catch a tennis ball in front of him. Various different drills like that, pulling up to shooting drills, coming off, shooting off the dribble, pump fake, driving to the basket, just all sorts of drills that involved a lot of lateral movement, a lot of mobility, things that you would want to see somebody who's recovering, who's 2 years post ACL injury and 1 year post, not even a full year post Achilles injury, that you'd want to see him do. And again, I think we take anything with a bit of a grain of salt until we've seen him on the court again, because at this time last year, the expectation was that Steele Venters was going to return from his ACL injury, that he was going to make his Gonzaga season debut just a year late. And instead, he re-injured himself, or injured himself again, a different injury this time, and ended up missing another season. Obviously, we hope more than anything else that something like that does not happen again. But the fact that he's working out well in this video clip doesn't necessarily mean, doing these kind of drills and doing this kind of stuff is still a far cry from full speed contact scrimmages, from 3-on-3 work, from 5-on-5 work. And then even then, like 5-on-5 practices is a huge monumental step. But the difference between that and being able to play night in and night out at the Division I level is still staggering. Like, I think there's this expectation that, like, oh, once he's doing 5-on-5 drills, he's good to go. And it's like, Steele hasn't played Division I basketball at that level in years. And the amount of just exhaustion that the amount of energy that it takes, the amount of exhaustion that comes from playing a full speed in a game when your adrenaline's extra high, when there's the crowd factor, like all that stuff. We can't really project anything based on certainly not on a video clip here. But again, while this doesn't tell us a lot, it's everything it does tell us is positive. He's continuing to work very hard to get back onto the floor after not being able to play the last 2 years. He feels comfortable showing us what progress he has made. And in the video, the progress looks good. He does not look, he's moving on those ankles good. He's moving on, the foot obviously looks like it's doing better. In the video, you can't tell which foot is the one that got hurt. You can't tell which knee was he just looks like he's moving pretty fluidly, working really hard, putting in the work necessary to get back from these kind of injuries. Just as a reminder for folks who maybe are not even fully sure what the Steele Venters story is, maybe newer Zag fans or just people who aren't plugged in on a day-to-day basis, Steele Venters actually committed to Gonzaga out of the transfer portal a week or two before both Ryan Nembhard and Graham Ike committed to Gonzaga around the same time, out of course, Wyoming and Creighton, respectively, for Nembhard and Ike. And Venters was kind of the third piece of that transfer portal class coming in, expected to be the floor spacing wing. You have the elite point guard coming in. Nembhard delivered on that account. You have the elite low post scoring big. Graham Ike delivered on that account. And Venters was kind of that third piece, the 3-point floor spacing wing who can attack closeouts, make backdoor cuts, space the floor, do those things. And then for Venters, 2 days before the 23-24 season began, we got the report that Steele Venters had torn his ACL in a practice and was going to miss the entire season. It thrust Dusty Stromer into a starting role as a true freshman, a role he held for about half the year before it ultimately went to Ben Gregg. And Gonzaga went with that three big starting lineup that included Ike, Watson, and Gregg, all starting together, while Venters then kind of transitioned to coming off the bench. And then after that season, Venters was working on coming back. We'd heard a little bit from the athletic trainer, a little bit from the staff, like, hey, he's, we're hoping to have him do 5-on-5 stuff by September. We're hoping to have him back, ready to start playing in games as soon as the season begins. Gonzaga obviously went out and got Caleb Battle, and they went out and got Michael Ajayi and kind of built a roster where they didn't necessarily need to rely as heavily on Venters. And they did go out and get Emmanuel Innocente. And reading between the lines, Mark Few had indicated that Innocente was potentially going to redshirt. And then they changed their mind on that. And I do think in part because Innocente impressed them in practices and summer workouts, but also I think because of the Steele Venters news meant, okay, we're going to be without him for another year. So we want to make sure we have enough depth out on the wing. So I felt like they were a little bit prepared for the possibility of not having Steele. Certainly, I don't think they were expecting him to suffer another injury to a different leg that takes him out for a full season. But I think they were at least expecting, hey, he might not be 100% when the season begins, or any kind of setback could be enough for us to just bang another season with him. And then obviously that ended up being the case. And now you look at this roster as it's currently constructed. I mean, they brought in a 6'7" wing and Jalen Warley out of the transfer portal during the season last year. He's going to make his debut for Gonzaga this year. They brought in a 6'3" floor spacing shooting guard who's a 43% three-point shooter, and Adam Miller, who's going to kind of help replace Nolan Hickman. Then they bring in a 6'7" wing and Tyon Grant Foster, who's going to help replace Caleb Battle. So again, I don't think any of these moves are necessarily directly related to Steele Venters, other than I think the team is fairly clearly preparing for a situation where Venters is unable to contribute either at all or is not able to contribute much this season. I think that is the right thing to do, just because even if the recovery is going well, it can be going perfectly on track until it's not. And that's what happened last year. And I know that that's not what any single person on the planet wants to happen again for Steele Venters, but I do think that the staff is preparing for that. They also have Davis Fogel, the freshman who's 6'7", coming into the mix as well. Of course, Innocente is coming back. So they are prepared. But if Steele Venters does continue to make a fully healthy recovery and is able to contribute, once again, I don't think you throw him in and play him 25 minutes a game. I would be willing to say here in early June that I don't think Steele Venters ever plays 25 minutes this upcoming season for Gonzaga. In a best case scenario, he does play semi-regular rotation minutes this year, and then maybe next year, because he will have another year of eligibility if he wants it. Maybe then he can start to play a bigger role. But this roster is not set up for him to play 25 minutes a game, barring multiple injuries. And also, I just don't think they want to put that on him. I don't think they want to expect that from him, or I don't think they want to have to need that from him, if that makes sense. If he can do it, great. You may not need it, but at least it's in the bag, it's there. But I think that they want to ease him into action, playing a few minutes here and there, maybe kind of as that 8th, 9th guy in the rotation, which I think is sort of where he's at right now. But the good news, if you do get Venters able to contribute, he brings something to this team that they don't have a lot of other players who do. Again, Adam Miller's a good three-point shooter. He was very good last year at Arizona State, but he's been a little inconsistent in his career. Steele Venters is a drop-dead sniper three-point shooter. 43.5% back in 21-22, and that was on 6 3-point attempts per game. 43.5% on 6 attempts per game. And then the following year, he was 37% on like 5.8 attempts per game. So a similar volume, similarly effective percentage. Obviously, 43 is much better than 37, but they're still very, very good. He averaged over 15 points per game both those years. He was Big Sky Player of the Year over a player at Northern Colorado named Dalton Connect, who since then has now become an All-American at Tennessee and then played a rookie year last year with the Los Angeles Lakers. In that entire time that Connect was an All-American at Tennessee and a rookie for the Lakers, Steele Venters wasn't even getting a chance to play, but that will hopefully change this year. Very excited for Steele. Was so happy to see this video clip. I'll post a link in the show notes if you haven't checked it out. Just so excited to see him looking good and getting back to playing ball and getting some shots up in the gym and some drills. And hopefully it'll lead to him being able to play for Gonzaga this year, because that's been his dream. Kid from Ellensburg, always wanted to play at Gonzaga, has had to wait much longer than he should have had to wait. Literally the entirety of Ryan Nemhard's career at Gonzaga was encapsulated by Steele Venters being on the roster and never setting foot on the floor. Hopefully that'll change this year, and we'll get a chance to see him finally live out his dream and help contribute to this team in a key area of need as an outside shooter. Well, folks, a former Idaho State forward, speaking of the Big Sky, who played at the same high school as a Gonzaga legend, just became available in the transfer portal after making a decommitment. Could he be a target for the Zags? We're going to talk about that coming up in just a second. But first, folks, the NBA playoffs are in full swing. I'm recording this before game one between Oklahoma City and Indiana in the NBA Finals. But, folks, every single night of these playoffs have been delivering highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. So whether it's a game-winning shot like Tyrese Halliburton had against the Knicks, whether it's a breakout player, there's never been a better time than right now to get in on all the action. And FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game, both before tip-off and live. Whether it's player props, performance trends, or same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Looking ahead for the Zags, 2026 National Championship odds are at plus 3,000. You could have cashed in at plus 4,000 before the addition of Tyon Grant Foster. Now it's still plus 3,000 though, so plenty of money to be had. And folks, if you're new to FanDuel, it is the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. So make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, folks, segment two, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Switching gears here, we talked about Steele Venters and his workout video that he posted on Instagram, what it might mean for him in his recovery from an Achilles injury that he suffered while recovering from an ACL injury. The previous year has missed the last 2 full seasons for Mark Few and the Zags. Now, I want to talk about a transfer portal target that Gonzaga could potentially pursue. We feel like Gonzaga's pursuits of players in the transfer portal has significantly died down after adding both Adam Miller and Tyon Grant Foster. We also know the team is currently working on securing Spanish guard Mario Saint-Superi, an international freshman 19-year-old who could come in and be that backup point guard for Braden Smith next year. But Gonzaga still has a little bit of a need for a power forward, and there's a player who just became available after decommitting in the transfer portal, is considered one of the better power forward players still on the market, and he's got some connections to Gonzaga. That would be former Miami and Idaho State forward Kiree Huie. Kiree Huie is a 6'9" rising junior forward, or I think senior forward. He's from Grayson, Georgia initially. He is left-handed, which I feel like bears mentioning because Gonzaga's bigs are almost all left-handed. In fact, on this roster, Ismaila Diani, Ismaila Diani, Graham Ike, and Braden Huff are all left-handed. I think Lemke might have been left-handed too. Either way, Sam Dower left-handed, Shema Karnowski, Domantas Sabonis. The Zags love their lefties. Kiree Huie is a lefty. He played high school basketball at Liberty High School in Nevada, which is the same high school as Julian Strother. So we got a connection to a Gonzaga school there. And you got a lefty big, which is something we know the Zags love. He began his college basketball career at Odessa Junior College in the 22-23 season. After 1 year at Odessa, he then transferred to Idaho State. So another connection, as he's played very local to Spokane by playing at Idaho State in Moscow. He played for them in the 2023-24 season and immediately his first year Division I basketball after coming over from the JUCO level. He was a starter and a big-time contributor for the Bengals. 34 games, started 32 of them, played about 27 minutes per game. And with Idaho State, he averaged 11.3 points, 5.8 rebounds, and 1.2 blocks per game. Shot about 54% from the field. Was not a great free throw shooter, about 58% from the free throw line, about 59%. Regardless, still not a great free throw shooter. He finished 10th in the Big Sky in rebounds per game. He was third in the Big Sky in offensive rebounds per game. That is one of his better skill sets, is being able to crash the offensive glass a bit, reminiscent of Ben Gregg, who was a phenomenal offensive rebounder as well. He also finished 5th in the Big Sky in blocks per game. Had some nice games. His best performance, especially when compared to the opponent, was a game against Oregon State, where he had a double-double, 15 points, 10 rebounds on 7 of 14 shooting. His performance at Idaho State was enough for him to get recruited by Miami in the transfer portal, Coach Jim Laranaga's final season with the Canes. And unfortunately, Huie didn't actually play for Coach Laranaga, I should say, while at Miami, because Huie did not make his season debut with Miami until January 14th. He suffered an injury and was not able to play until the final half of the season. Meanwhile, Coach Laranaga actually retired in December. I think on Boxing Day was when he announced his retirement in the middle of the season, which was just threw an already not good Miami season into complete and total disarray. And it's part of the reason that I'm not going to judge his performance at Miami all that seriously, in part because it was only 14 games, because he'd been dealing with the injury, and in part because the coach who went out and recruited him literally wasn't the coach anymore by the time he was finally healthy enough to actually play games for the Canes. He played 14 games at Miami, started 2 of them. His numbers at Miami are not great. 1.5 points, 1.5 rebounds per game, 47% on twos. Still not a great free throw shooter, about 57% there. In his 4th career game, he started in a road game against Cal, played 18 minutes, had 4 points, 4 boards on 2 of 3 shooting and a block shot. But then after that, after starting and playing pretty well, he then played 5 or less minutes in each of the next 6 games. And then in the final 4 games, he averaged about 15 minutes per game. His playing time, he kind of got jerked around a little bit as Miami was well out of contention by that point, had an interim head coach. It was just a really messy situation for him. And I think unfortunate that he didn't get to showcase what he could do at a higher level in the ACC at Miami. He just didn't really ever get that opportunity because of the coaching change and the injury and not really coming back until the season was so far in the toilet that it just didn't really even matter at that point. He was one of the first players to enter the transfer portal after the season ended for Miami, and they brought in their new head coach, Jay Lucas, from Duke. Huie, there was not a lot of attention on Huie while he was in the transfer portal until about a week ago when he committed to UT San Antonio UTSA out of the transfer portal. And then a few days ago, I think 2 days ago, as you're listening to this show, he decommitted from UT San Antonio and became available once again in the transfer portal. This was reported by good friend of the podcast, Tobias Bass of The Athletic. At this point, Huie now becomes one of the more intriguing big men available in the transfer portal, which says a little bit about the upside that Huie may have. It also says a little bit more about the lack of depth that there is among front court players still remaining in the transfer portal, which is not surprising. It's June. Most teams have their roster at or very close to being set. And so players like this are there's just not that many good players available in the transfer portal. And so for a guy like Huie, he's, not the most appealing name that's going to be out there. And at the early in the offseason, he wasn't a particularly appealing name at all, but now he carries a little bit more weight just by being one of the better players available at his position. No other schools were listed when he committed to UTSA. It wasn't like, oh, he picked UTSA over a final 3 of so-and-so and so-and-so. There wasn't other schools really reported. So doing some digging, there was kind of hard to find any obvious connections for him. We know he's from Georgia, so maybe he looks at going back to the state of Georgia, whether that's a power conference team like Georgia, Georgia Tech, whether that's a mid-major out there, Georgia Southern, Georgia State, somebody like that. Again, played high school ball in Idaho, played high school ball in Nevada, played college ball in Idaho. So he's been around the block a little bit. So there's not really any specifics guesses as to where he might go at this point. I think he's going to get some more attention than he might normally get just simply by being one of the better players available at a position of need. In terms of his fit at Gonzaga, he's a 6'9" rebounding forward. He plays power forward. He's a good offensive rebounder. Those tend to be the things that Gonzaga would look for out of like a hustle fourth big to bring in onto the roster. Now, the biggest knock the biggest reason that this might not be a good fit is that Huey's not a floor spacer at all. Like, he's taken almost no 3-pointers in his career. He does not space the floor. He does not shoot threes. Again, he's under 58% from the free throw line. There is no range to his game offensively. He is a rim runner. He is a good shot blocker, which is nice. He is a good offensive rebounder. He scores at the basket with his left hand. That's about it. He's not somebody that you could use. I made the Greg comparison earlier from the offensive rebounding perspective, but he's not somebody who can be utilized the same way, where he's playing away from the rim, doing that stuff, like pulling defenders away from the bigs. Like, that's not really the role that he fills. But if you wanted a hustle power forward who plays a few minutes per game, can spell the bigs when they're in foul trouble or just need a break, he could absolutely fill that role. He could absolutely be that guy. Does he want to be that guy? I don't know. And if he doesn't, if he says, I want to go somewhere where I can play 25 minutes per game and score double figures, you say, great, tip your hat. Thanks for hearing our call. Good luck to you, because that's not going to happen at Gonzaga. But if he wants to go somewhere where he could compete for a championship, where he could be, around the best coaches and some of the best players in the country, maybe he knows he's playing a small role and he's competing with a true freshman in Parker Jefferson for those fourth big minutes. If he's willing to do that, you could go a lot worse than Kiree Huie. I watched some tape. I watched some clips of him. Like, he is fun to watch, and he does have a lot of energy and works his tail off. But again, you're needing to find somebody who's willing to come in and play a very small role. And sometimes players don't want to do that. And it's very justified if that's not the role that you want to fill, especially for what will be his final year of eligibility. But it is not his final year. He'll have 2 years of eligibility. So maybe he'd want to come try this out for a year. But he'd have to want to fill that role. And if he does, I think you could do a lot worse than Huie filling out that final roster spot and being a fringe rotation player for the Zags next year. All right, folks, closing out the show, talking conference realignment in the news again this week. Utah Valley moving to the Big West. Was this a swing and a miss for the WCC? We're going to talk about that coming up in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, closing out the show and the week, talking about conference realignment. As we talked about earlier in this week, there's still not a lot of updates between the Pac-12 and the Mountain West as they are in mediation currently. We did see the schools that are departing the Mountain West make that official. The schools, of course, being Fresno State, San Diego State, Boise State, Colorado State, and Utah State all joining, Oregon State, Washington State, and Gonzaga in the new look Pac-12. But until we have some updates on mediation, that's when we'll start to see who the Pac-12 is going to add for their 8th full member, which they have to do before July 1st. And then we'll get some more updates on the media rights deal, perhaps some more realignment updates after that. But until then, it's kind of just all quiet on the Western Front with regards to the Pac-12. The latest move, however, does have some involvement in the WCC and Gonzaga space, as Utah Valley joining the Big West Conference alongside Cal Baptist. The Cal Baptist news was reported, I think, about a month ago. Utah Valley was widely expected to follow suit, has now been made official by the university. Both of these schools, Utah Valley and Cal Baptist, are leaving the WAC, the Western Athletic Conference, for the Big West starting in the 26-27 school year. So not this upcoming season, but in the next cycle when Gonzaga is leaving for the Pac-12. These are two of the more well-regarded non-football programs that were on the West Coast, specifically that weren't already in either the Big West or the WCC. The Big West is not a football conference. They do have a lot of programs that play football, but they all play in different conferences. So the Big West does make a lot of sense as an addition for these two programs. The Big West has really tried to stay almost entirely in the state of California. They had Hawaii as a member institution for a long time. Hawaii leaves for the Mountain West along with UC Davis. So those two departures are what led the Big West to bringing in Utah Valley and Cal Baptist. So they lost one of their California schools and their lone non-California school. So they went out and added a California school in Cal Baptist and then a non-California school in Utah Valley. So Utah Valley will compete in a conference completely full of teams in the state of California. These were two of the better programs that I think the Big West could have pursued to offset those losses of Davis and Hawaii. But it also feels like this was a miss for the WCC. And I think that's kind of the focus of this conversation is the WCC is now down to 9 programs. Once Gonzaga leaves, of course, Gonzaga, Oregon State, and Washington State all leaving. Washington State and Oregon State have been kind of affiliate members of the WCC on a temporary basis, but the two of them and Gonzaga will all be part of the new look Pac-12 starting in 2026. That'll leave the WCC with just 9 programs. That'll be the 8 returners: St. Mary's, San Francisco, Santa Clara, LMU, Pepperdine, Portland, San Diego, and Pacific. And then, of course, the one newcomer who is joining this year in Seattle University. That will be your 9-team WCC. However, St. Mary's is still heavily involved in rumors to potentially join the Pac-12, following in Gonzaga's footsteps as a, of course, non-football addition to the conference. Again, the expectation is that the Pac-12 will finish mediation. They will add their 8th full-time member, probably Texas State, although that is not confirmed. And then they will get their media rights deal announced. When all of those things happen, which is probably over the next 6 to 8 weeks or so, then I think the Pac-12 will prioritize other additions, whether it's full-time members or satellite members or non-football members like St. Mary's. If that happens, then the WCC is down to just 8. That's a really precarious position to be in. And one of the things that Stu Jackson has done a good job of since taking over as commissioner of the WCC, seemingly, has been being proactive. They go out and get Oregon State and Washington State to bolster their conference's reach for a multi-year period of time. They go out and strike agreements with both Grand Canyon and Seattle U to join the conference, knowing Gonzaga is going to leave, or knowing that Gonzaga is in those conversations, and they kind of struck before they needed to in order to have some self-preservation. Obviously, it did not work with Grand Canyon, where Grand Canyon joins the conference. Then Gonzaga leaves and Grand Canyon backs out because they said, oh, whoa, we thought Gonzaga was going to be a part of it. You know, whatever. I think that there's a little bit of them just getting cold feet and trying to find an excuse to get out of it. But that was a move that the WCC made that was strong and proactive and kind of helping keep the viability of the league, which is why them missing out on Cal Baptist and Utah Valley, who both very logically fit the conference, both geographically. I know Utah Valley is a little bit out there, but it's the same distance BYU was from the WCC. They were very willing to make that work at the time. I don't see why they wouldn't. And Utah Valley is huge. It's a massive institution. It's bigger than every school in the Big West, and I'm almost positive it's bigger than every school in the WCC. In fact, I think I can say confidently I am positive that it's bigger than every school in the WCC, obviously outside of the affiliates. And so for the WCC to not hit on a school in Utah Valley that has basketball success, recent basketball success, that geographically is in a spot that they're familiar with, they're comfortable with, that brings a large active fan base, is striking. It's a bit surprising. And same with Cal Baptist. Baptist is more of a smaller school, kind of more of the traditional fit for a WCC school. Like they're more similar institutionally to somebody like St. Mary's or San Francisco or Santa Clara, those schools. But they're also on the rise. They've kind of been up and down in basketball, but they've had some success despite not being at the D1 level for very long. Geographically, they're obviously a very logical fit. And so for the WCC to lose out on both of these programs to the Big West means one of two things. Either they didn't pursue them very hard or at all, which is surprising to me. It feels like they were very obvious example or schools that would have made sense for this conference to keep themselves alive and afloat, or they got outbid by the Big West, which is even more of a problem. If the Big West is able to promise them things that the WCC is not promising financially or whatever else these schools wanted, that's not a great sign for the WCC either. So I don't know which of those it is, but I know that a pool of programs that were available to the WCC just got a lot weaker without either of those teams being options right now for the West Coast Conference. Now, the good news for the WCC is the bad news for the WAC, the Western Athletic Conference, because they, I think, are on their deathbed. The WAC now in 26-27 is down to just 5 schools. That's it. That's all that's left. Because Cal Baptist and Utah Valley have left now for the Mountain West, or for the Big West, Grand Canyon, of course, left for the Mountain West. Seattle U left for the WCC. The only 5 teams left in the conference starting in 26-27 are Abilene Christian, Southern Utah, Utah Tech, Tarleton State, and UT Arlington. not a particularly appealing group of schools, and also not enough to have a conference. So maybe the WAC tries to backfill, see if they can find some other teams to boost this conference up. But I think, unfortunately, the more likely outcome is that these schools find themselves in a different conference and the WAC ends up dissolving. That's what I think is going to happen here. And it's unfortunate. As somebody who attended Seattle U, I literally have a sweatshirt with the WAC logo on it. I have a backpack with the WAC logo on it. Like, I was a part of the WAC for a period of time as a grad student. So it's sad to see this conference likely coming to a close here very soon. For the WCC, it gives them some options. Of those 5 remaining schools, 4 of them are football schools. So I don't think they would consider the WCC unless the WCC could convince them to house their other programs there, but then have their football probably not go independent, but perhaps just football joins another conference. But in that case, if like the Southland or Conference USA or whatever says, hey, yeah, we'll take Tarleton State's football, I think Tarleton State would just join the Southland. I don't see why they would like split it up like that. So I think that that's a challenge for them. The only non-football school on this group, by the way, is UT Arlington. That's a really tough fit for the WCC to have a school in Arlington, Texas, and then every other one of your programs be located in either California, Oregon, or Washington. Like, that is brutal. That's brutal. I don't think that works. UT Arlington would have to have a travel partner at that point. Who's going to do it? Like, what? Maybe you do find a way to get UT Arlington and Tarleton State or Abilene Christian, who are both also in Texas. One of them houses their football somewhere else and you have a travel partner, but it's not super appealing. Best case scenario, you land those 2 schools. They're not great. They're just not great. They're not great additions to the conference. They don't fit institutionally. They don't fit geographically. This is why, in my opinion, missing out on Utah Valley and Cal Baptist was critically bad for the WCC, because their other options outside of that are stand pat at 9 and hope you don't get poached again, which is not a great option either. Or I mean, there are other schools you could potentially look at. Maybe you try to get UC San Diego, somebody like that, but it's going to be pretty tough. It's going to be pretty tough. I have a little bit of concern about the viability of the WCC, not super short term, but in 5 years or now, how's this conference going to look? Like, it's not in a great spot right now. And I'd feel a lot better about it if they had been able to bring in at least one of Cal Baptist or Utah Valley, but not getting either of them feels like a pretty big and potentially significant moment in the history of the WCC. That's going to wrap it up for me today for this week on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. I hope you all have a fantastic weekend. We'll be back next week with some recaps on the NBA Finals. We'll continue to talk transfer portal, NBA draft stuff. We'll continue to talk recruiting as well for the Zags. Thanks again, folks. Once again, have a fantastic weekend. And as always, go Zags.